If a vehicle is difficult to start, idles rough, hesitates, or lacks power under load, it may have a fuel pump problem. But replacing a fuel pump can become a costly mistake if it's not the true cause of the problem. Your fuel system should be tested for electrical integrity, pressure, and flow volume before diagnosing the pump as the source of the problem. Hi, I'm Connor from Delphi, and today I'll take you through the 4 steps needed to test fuel pressure and flow from the fuel module or pump. Step 1 for any automotive repair is safety first. When performing fuel system diagnostic tests, it's essential to remember that releasing fuel under pressure can cause a fire and potential injury. Wear your safety glasses and gloves, and make sure you are working in a well-ventilated area. Don't smoke, and don't have anything around that can cause a spark. You should also have a Class B fire extinguisher on hand. With safety covered, you're ready for step 2. Checking the fuel pump fuse and relay. If the engine cranks normally but fails to start, first check the fuel pump relay and fuse. If the relay is bad, replacing it may fix the issue. If you find a blown fuse, replacing it may give you a quick fix, but you still need to determine what caused the fuse to blow. They rarely fail on their own. However, if the relay and fuse are good, you're on to step 3, checking the fuel pressure. To check the fuel pressure, you'll need to hook up a fuel pressure gauge and, if available, a flow tester. For this test, you may have to block the fuel regulator's return line if the vehicle has one. Once your gauge is installed, start the car. Let it idle and observe the pressure reading. Compare the reading to the manufacturer's specification. If the fuel pressure is low, it's time for step 4, voltage testing the fuel pump or fuel module. Some vehicles have access to the fuel module from under the rear seat or through an access panel. But on many vehicles, accessing the fuel module requires dropping the gas tank. But once you have access to the pump or module, you can test the voltage. First, test the voltage coming into the fuel module. We're going to demonstrate testing a traditional fuel module with a multimeter. But be aware that in some newer vehicles, the fuel pump has an electronic control unit with a pulse width modulation signal. You can't test these with a conventional digital multimeter. You'll need an oscilloscope or another diagnostic tool. To test with a multimeter, disconnect the harness coming into the module and identify the positive and ground slots in the connector. Check the wiring diagram for the pin assignments. If you don't have the wiring diagram, the 2 heavier wires coming into the connector are usually the positive and ground lines. You'll need an assistant to be ready to operate the ignition. When your test leads are in contact with the connector slots for ground and positive, set your meter to the correct voltage range. Have your assistant place the ignition in the start position. You'll get voltage to the pump for about 2 seconds as the vehicle tries to prime the pump. During that time, you should typically see a reading of around 12.5 to 13 volts. If the voltage is 11 volts or less, or there's no voltage at all, there's an electrical issue, and you'll have to address that. However, this does not necessarily indicate that the pump was the problem. Check the fuel pump ground. It should be less than 0.200 volts. If it is higher than this, repair the ground first before proceeding with further testing. Another method of testing the fuel pump is to use a low amperage probe to measure the amperage draw of the pump. Using an oscilloscope will enable you to see the condition of the pump. The most accurate method for testing fuel delivery is to use a flow meter. If you have access to a flow meter, follow the directions based on the fuel system you're working with. If the fuel pressure drops during the volume test, it could indicate a problem with the fuel pump check valve or, again, a leak in the system. If the fuel pressure seems high but the volume output is low, it could indicate a restriction in the fuel lines or a faulty fuel pressure regulator. If you don't have access to a flow meter, here's a method for performing a timed fuel delivery test using a measuring container and a stopwatch. This procedure involves pumping gas directly from the fuel line, so extreme caution is necessary. You'll disconnect the fuel line either near the fuel rail or locate the fuel pressure regulator and measure the fuel pressure in the line that exits it. With the vehicle off, run the fuel line into your container. Since the car won't run without fuel, you'll use your scan tool to activate the fuel pump relay. Activate the relay and collect a fuel sample with the pump, then stop the pump. Note the amount of fuel collected and then check your manufacturer's specification to see if your pump is delivering the correct amount. You may need to convert ounces per second to gallons per hour to determine the proper value. If the fuel volume is below the manufacturer's spec, it could indicate a clogged fuel filter, a faulty fuel pump, or a leak in the system. Be aware that some vehicles utilize two pumps, a low-pressure pump in the module and a high-pressure pump located closer to the engine. It's essential to check both, but the latest high-pressure pumps put out fuel at tremendous pressure. You need dedicated equipment to safely check the pressure and volume coming out of these super high-pressure pumps. And that brings us to the end of our tips on testing fuel pressure and flow from the fuel module or pump. With these steps complete, you can accurately determine whether a fuel pump replacement is the correct course of action. And remember to perform all the steps covered today anytime any one of these steps is being considered. Safety first, test electrical integrity, then test fuel pressure, and test fuel volume. Subscribe to our channel below so you can refer to this video in the future and have access to other service videos from Delphi. And check out DelphiAutoparts.com for other great resources. I'm Connor with Delphi. Thanks for watching.